Hey guys. I was trying to make him dance, but I just couldn't coordinate myself. He's on a stick. I had him dancing a minute ago. That's why I was late turning on after the commercial. Thank you, Druid. So happy Thursday. Happy Friday Eve, you guys. Hey, Robin. My favorite people are here. Robin says, note to self, don't try to clean your laptop screen while you're using it, especially if it's a touch screen. That is a very good public service announcement. I, too, have fallen into the trap of trying to clean my screen. And I, too, have a touch screen. So these modern ages, they trick us, right? So it's Friday Eve. Man, where does the time go? I know I'm a broken record. I say this literally every stream. So a couple of reminders. Let's see. First of all, Jill put out our schedule for quilt nerding, which also has my schedule in it. So if you have questions, look at the quilt nerding Instagram or Facebook page if you belong to that, because Jill's posted that. We are getting ready to travel. I will be here for next Monday's stream, and then Thursday is a travel day for me. So there will be no stream next Thursday. There will also not be a stream the following Monday. So I'll put it on the Facebook page for Cake TV, and I'll try to remember to do it here on the schedule for Twitch. The Twitch schedule is such a pain in the rear. Like, it won't let you set future stuff. Like, I can't say that, there's not going to be a stream next Thursday until I do this stream. So it's crazy. There's like a vacation thing in there, but it just messes everything up. Anyway, Twitch, work on that. So that's a big announcement. And then, so I will probably be doing some traveling at the end later on in the month. Definitely doing traveling at the end of the month. So I will keep letting you guys know when the stream is going to be canceled so that you don't take the time out. This is just a crazy month, and we kind of forewarned you, especially on Quilt Nerding. Jill has talked about it a lot. So, but we'll be getting lots of great stories. We'll be seeing fun things. So you guys will be the beneficiaries of all that when we come back. So before I forget, we are still shilling our hosted lecture. And I'm going to drop it in the chat. Pam Week's lecture, it's coming up April 12th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a Saturday. And she will be lecturing on the portable patchwork topic. And I will be doing a giveaway for her book. So if you are a member of the Quilt Nerding Facebook group, you'll be able to get to the giveaway for this. So keep an eye out for that. I'll probably post it probably tonight, because I promised Jill I would. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That'll enable you to join the drawing, and it'll give you enough time if you are interested in reading the book with us, which we will be doing. It'll give you enough time if you do win to get the book from us, or if you don't win to order the book yourself. And Pam is offering autographed copies, shipping included. And her information is on my Slow Sewing Shop page where the registration for the lecture is. So hope you're interested and available. If you're not available but interested, we'll have the stream available for 7 days afterwards. So you'll still be able to see it, even if you aren't available on Saturday, the 12th. And if it's something that does not tickle your fancy, no worries. If we could just ask you to share, if you're part of any private groups that allow that, or, your quilt guild, whatever you got out there, if you could let people know who might be interested. So that is my big announcements. So, Robin, yes, the Twitch schedule. Yeah, you remember. Robin used to help manage the schedule for Mary Fawn's Quilt Nerd. And it was such a pain in the rear. So, what else do I have to show you? Oh, before we get started, my injury has prevented me from doing much. But the last few days I was like, I gotta sew. So I started... Foolish me. Like, you'd think I would pick something where I could just sew with big stitches. No. I picked something that's very, very microscopic. So this, I showed you guys this pattern the other day. It's a pattern in a kit that I splurged on. It's clovers and shades of green. They're velvet pin cushions. It's like a reproduction type project. And I'm excited about it because, sometimes... Like, oh God, this sounds like a really awful humble brag, but a lot of times kits, I either get bored with it or it's too easy, too fast. And that's the thing. Sometimes kits are meant for beginners. They're meant to teach a technique or, just people want to make a thing. Yeah. Right, Robin? Sometimes you just got to stitch. Yeah. I will not let an injury get in my way. If I had to hold these things with my foot stitch, I would have done that. But I like this because it's tiny and it is challenging. And I think even if I wasn't injured, it has the right level of challenge for my sewing because, I've been sewing for a while. And so I thought I would show you my progress so far. So I'm making the 4-leaf clover. And so the silk velvet, oh, you guys, silk velvet is sumptuous. And so I had to make these little heart shapes out of the velvet. Oh my goodness, it's so soft. It's like a kitten's ear. And here's the beautiful thing about silk velvet. It's a little wiggly and you should interface it with a particular kind of interfacing. But once you get it stuffed and ready to sew for, and ready to stuff, your stitches kind of sink into it. So the fact that I probably am not stitching my best, you can't tell. I mean, you can't even see the stitches. It's a little wonky along the edge, but you really can't see the stitches. So that's a beautiful thing. I fully support hand stitching on velvet because you can't see the stitches. But the next step in this is putting this little beaded edge. And I know that my screen is not picking this up very well. Yeah. So much for that. But it's a little picot edge that you do with 2 different size beads. There's a bead that goes against the fabric or against the object that's sort of lays down flat. And then you have this other tinier bead that pops up above it. So it makes like a little picot edge. So I've been working on that. I have to do 2 beads at a time and then I have to put the thing down and do the little stitch. I've been keeping my beads in an itty bitty little salt cellar. I bought these salt cellars to make pin cushions with and I have yet to do that, but they're awful handy for beads. So that is what I've been working on at night. It has taken me several days to get this far. But I'm taking my time and I'm being careful. And this is just a little treat for moi. But isn't it going to be so cute when I get it together? It's going to be all beaded and jeweled and pretty. So, yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do a little project. So, I had to show that off. So today, my friends, we are going to look at quilters. Oh, thanks, Robin. They are. I couldn't resist. I saw our friend Don Ronigan, who wrote American American Needlework, Antique American Needlework Tools, and we read that and interviewed her on quilt nerding. She's a good friend, and I saw that she is friends with Mary Jo Heine, who designed this, and she has stitched several of Mary Jo's projects. And I always just think they're so beautiful. And I've looked at our site before, but then when Dawn stitched the shamrocks right before St. Patrick's Day, I was like, oh, I have a special place in my heart for shamrocks. So I just couldn't resist. So, all right. Quilters Newsletter Magazine. I was like, I have got this treasure trove. I need to start sharing this bounty. I need to start looking at these magazines. So I thought I would just pick an April issue because we are on the precipice of April. And I quickly photographed it today. Luckily, Quilters Newsletter Magazine, this particular one is only like 56 pages. So I was able to get every page. So we're going to flip through it. And there are some things in here that I think you might be interested in. And I will read some stuff. And I have to cross-reference 2 other Quilters Newsletter magazines. This is the beautiful thing. Quilters Newsletter Magazine, like many women's magazines, it's not just QNM that did this. Lots and lots of women's magazines throughout history. I mean, we can go back to Godey's, and they did this, was offering serial information. So, you want to have this whole series of articles or how-to, block of the month type things, techniques, all that stuff. You're going to want to buy every issue, right? Like it is really brilliant to set things up that way because, of course people are going to be like, oh, I want to follow this person, Jean Ray Laurie. She always has columns and serial related things in here. So, it's going to inspire people to either buy the magazine regularly or to get a subscription. So, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are not at all surprised, I know, because this is a tactic, right? So let me switch over to the other screen where I have these photographs, and let me adjust this a little bit. There we go. All right. So this is April 1986. Where were you in April 1986? And those of you millennials and Gen Zs out there, I don't want to hear from you. Because I know you're going to say something like, oh, I was still in diapers, or I wasn't born yet. And you're going to make the rest of us feel old. So knock that off. But I just, April 1986, I was in middle school. I was in 8th grade. So, and I know folks a generation ahead of me are going like, all right, Cake, take your own words and be quiet. But yeah, it's funny. Like I literally have some vague memories of this, of like April, May, June, 1986. It was the end of 8th grade. So, it's really funny that I pulled this one and I was like, oh, so this is issue 181. 181. This means that they have published 180 issues before this. So Quilters Newsletter Magazine, I mean, come on. In 86, I mean, we're not even halfway through the magazine's run. So they quit publishing totally in 2016. But I think that the magazine had fundamentally changed by the time F&W was publishing it at that point, or Interweave was, maybe Interweave was part of that. Or F&W owned Interweave Assets and also Quilters Newsletter Magazine. And as we know, F&W, or maybe you don't know, F&W, they declared bankruptcy in 2018? Or no, maybe it was 2019. I'm drawing a complete blank right now, but it was before the pandemic. And they had screwed a bunch of people over, and including Bonds and Porter. And they, were all about like just, capitalism. I can't put it in nicer terms. F&W basically was an investment company. They didn't care necessarily about their audience, the market. They cared more about the money. And the things that I think quilters found, or people that appreciated quilts, because this magazine was not just for people that made quilts. This magazine also had information for people that were collectors, for people that, wanted to get information on either contemporary or historical quilts. So, I would say at sometimes Quilters Newsletter magazine was probably 50-50. Some like research type of data and informational and how to. The quilt magazines that are around today that are still available, and I mean, gosh, so many of them have gone out of business or have just stopped publishing or only do virtual things. They skew more heavily to how to make a project. So, not that there's anything wrong with that. That's clearly what people want, if that's what they're doing, or I assume they think that's what people want. But yeah, the early days of Quilters Newsletter magazine, I would say the first 2.5 decades, I would say, were really stellar. And it's, again, F&W came in, and it's just, you think, if you've ever seen the movie with Patrick, oh gosh, what's his last name? The guy that he played Batman. So the movie was American Psycho, and he basically played this psychopathic Wall Street guy. And, there's these scenes where he's imagining these horrible things and he's getting off on it. And one of the things that they're always saying is mergers and acquisitions. And he, in his mind, would hear murders and executions. And, it's all supposed to be this like horrifying play on words. But I'm looking at I worked for enough small companies throughout my career. When you talk about mergers and acquisitions, you are talking about murders and executions, because inevitably these kinds of like buying and selling of small companies and small enterprises, you're getting people that's like, oh, we've bought you. Now you're redundant. We're going to keep our people. So this whole group of people is going to be laid off. Or, we bought this portfolio of things and there's a couple of them that are just not doing well. So we're just going to get rid of those. And, that's like, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and rail against capitalism, because I buy things as much as the next guy. But, yeah, it just grosses me out, some of the things that have happened in our world. So anyway, I won't grouse about that anymore, but this 1986 in my mind is like, it's a great year for Quilters Newsletter magazine. The magazine is being printed on the nicer, glossier paper. It's got a little bit of a different look than the earlier issues. And because I'm missing a whole bunch of years from like 69 to 86. I'm not exactly sure when the masthead changed a little bit and the, just the look and feel changed, but it definitely did so over the years. And so 86, the Lehmans are still publishing this. Here on the front cover, and I think I mentioned this recently, Quilters Newsletter magazine would typically have a quilt on the cover that may or may not have been an article inside. This particular one is a historical quilt, an antique quilt. So there is an article inside that gives the instructions on how to make it and a little bit of history. So I'll read that to you. Now, other ones, and I'm going to show you once we get into the magazine a little bit. There's another one where it's a contemporary quilt. They just show the quilt on the inside of the cover. There's a little blurb about it, and that's it. So, they manage these things differently. So let me read to you what they have to say about this particular quilt. So I don't know that this is not a particularly politically correct name for this anymore, but this particular pattern was called Indian teepees. And it is, I think the technique that you use is kind of like, a little bit like a Lone Star, because you've got that angle of triangles. I'm sorry, of diamonds. And I think that you kind of piece it the same way that you would hand piece a, and we'll get to this page. You'll see the pattern when we get to that page. But anyway, so let me read this to you. More than 100 years ago, Mary Jane Reese Finley made the Indian teepees quilt shown on the magazine's cover. Her choice of bold colors and strong graphic design gave the quilt great charm and character to make what authors Carrie Bresnahan and Nancy Puentes call an evocative reflection of Southwestern frontier life. And that is quoted from their book, Lone Stars, A Legacy of Tennessee Quilts, Texas Quilts, Legacy of Texas Quilts, 1836 to 1936, the University of Texas Press. I have that book. I didn't pull it out. I was running out of time, and I thought, I could probably cross-reference a million things out of this magazine. So we'll look at that another time. But it kind of, I was like, gosh, 86, they had already published that book. In my mind, a lot of the books I have, I think, surely these books were published more recently, but there's a lot I have that I, realize as I'm reading, like, oh my gosh, that was published a really long time ago. And, data wise, it's still very relevant in the, in history. And then also just these quilts, we never tire of looking at them, So, they go on to say, it is not possible to know exactly where the quilt maker got her pattern or inspiration, although a similar pattern called Sugarloaf, I like that name, Sugarloaf, was printed in Hearth and Home magazine, which was published from 1868 to 1933. We do know that Mary Jane lived in Harmony Hill, Rusk County, Texas, close to Lake Cherokee, which was named for the Indians who once inhabited the area under Mexican treaty. Although the Indians were chased out of Texas in the Cherokee War, well, if that's what you want to call it, historically, I think we would probably say it differently today. But they left Texas in the Cherokee War of 1839. Their traditions and artifacts, such as arrowheads, would have remained throughout 1885 when the Indian teepee quilt was made. Our pattern variation for I cannot read today, you guys. Our pattern variation for Indian teepees calls for 30 blocks set with narrower sashes than in the original quilt and a border around all four sides. The quilt size is 81 by 96 and a half. They are 13-inch blocks. And then it just describes the assembly. And so we'll look at the pattern pieces in a minute, but I just thought it's an interesting quilt. I like the name Sugarloaf. And this is one of those quilts where, it's got fairly wide sashing, in my opinion. But if you kind of look at it, you get the sense of this secondary kind of pattern. So you've certainly got the T shape or cross shape of the pieced teepees, I guess, for lack of a better word. But then if you look at this empty space here, you've got this secondary shape, and then you've got this like almost circular shape around it. So I always love stuff like that when you back away from it, you've got this very different look to it. And sometimes an even more interesting look than when you're close up looking at just a block. So, all right, moving along. This magazine is in perfect shape, except for the crease in the corner and the coffee that no doubt my father spilled on this magazine. So now Quilters Newsletter magazine has a lot of ads, but I'm not mad about it. And I don't think anybody that read the magazine was mad about it because, we're talking about goods and services for your hobby. This is fun. This is, look at these patterns. These really cool floral things. I would say that these are contemporary designs. And at this point in time, I don't think we've got a whole lot of foundation piecing going, like paper foundation piecing. So this stuff is probably all inset. You've got a ton of Y seams, but, how pretty. We have all of the data in here. At this point, you know, there's a lot of quilters that are subscribing to this magazine. And so they've got the back order situation. You can get the binders to put these in. I've definitely met quilters that throughout the years, they finished off their subscriptions or their years, their missing issues, and they have these binders. Like, oh, what a treasure trove. My mom never invested in the binders. She just had them in magazine holders and, you know, in stacks. What's new in quilting and news? We're going to get to the sort of happenings in a minute, which are like quite a few pages. But this was interesting to me. George Mason University, I had a close friend who graduated from there. My brother-in-law went there for a couple minutes. But what I loved this is just reading this stuff in here. So this is Heritage Recreated and Celebrated. So this is Quilters at George Mason University. And I don't think it really tells much more about it. I'm like, what quilters? I mean, were they instructors? Was there a quilting? I don't know. But this quilt is really, really cool. I mean, it's kind of an album quilt, but they're not sashed. The blocks aren't sashed in a way that you would immediately think of historic album quilts. It's got this orange peel device in here that's making the like sort of flowers. It's got these gorgeous swags and tassels. But it's very Virginia-esque. All of the things in here are relevant to Virginia. So you've got buildings, the pineapple. I know the pineapple is sort of like a colonial era welcome, but let me tell you, you go anywhere where there's historic buildings in Virginia, you're going to find pineapple imagery. There's a lot of it. No doubt a cherry tree, George Washington, and so on. But some of the other things that are mentioned in here are the other needlework exhibitions. So at this time, there was a 10th needlework exhibition at the National Trust for Historic Preservation at Belgrove Plantation in Middletown, Virginia, which Belgrove was a big destination for quilting retreats or events and stuff. I know my mom definitely went to a number of things there at Belgrove. And then they say, as well as the 22nd Woodlawn Needlework Exhibition at Historic Mount Vernon. This is interesting because, so there's I think it's called Martha's Needlework or something. It's like a needlework club, and this exists now. It's basically like Martha's Stitchers or something like that. It's named after Martha Washington. It's relevant to Mount Vernon in the sense that, you know, they kind of came out of there, this group. But Woodlawn is a separate property, a separate historic property, and the needlework exhibition actually takes place at Woodlawn now. Now in '86, I don't know what the status of Woodlawn was. It very well might have been, you know, not operating as a historic home that you could come to and do whatever. They tend to have a lot of programs there because I think they have some rooms that are that they've emptied out, that they've, you know, made into where you could maybe take a little class, or they would have like maybe a contemporary exhibition. I know last time I was there, I definitely saw one contemporary exhibition. And then they had the needlework show. And it's funny, the needlework show, they take everybody. But it's a great way to get your stuff out there and possibly win prizes. But I've had a piece in the exhibition, and I haven't entered in a while just because I haven't had time. I haven't had any time to make anything specific for them. But when you go to the needlework exhibition, it's amazing. I mean, they mount people's stuff from like the ceiling down, and anything that they can like drape over a bed or a chair, or, I mean, you walk this place, you know, touring it like you would tour a historic home, but the needlework show is all over everything. It's wild. So at this point, we're obviously in the 50s of the number of the needlework show. In 1986, we're only on the 22nd. So it's wonderful to me, like, to look at these things historically and say that is still happening, versus, oh, that thing went out of business years ago, or they don't do that anymore. So that's why I'm pointing this out. Just I was like, oh, I see all these things in here that are still a thing. They're still happening. Other cool note about Woodlawn is it's not just the historic home Woodlawn. It's also the Pope Leahy house, which is on the same property, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright property. So it's and you can tour that too. Very cool stuff. Okay. Our next page. Quilting frames. It's funny. I was just paging through Facebook the other day, and there was somebody that it was not a quilting group. It was an embroidery group. But the person had that was posting had gone. I think it was one of those like buy nothing recycling kind of groups where, you know, you just go pick up something for free or you trade stuff. And this person had gotten a bunch of embroidery hoops. They're an embroiderer. But they got this weird hoop that was like a half a hoop, which they are called that, half hoops or D hoops. And she was like, what is this? And of course, there's a bunch of people that were like, it's a trap, which is funny. A crafter trap. I loved that. But a lot of other people knew that it was a quilting hoop. And what I never knew about it, I just always assumed like it was, you know, more helpful than having like this big round thing. You kind of have a half thing to like put against your body. But actually, apparently, I guess the way it's shaped, you use it on a border. And it, I guess, gives you more space on your board to access your border than, say, a round one does. Like, I'm not exactly sure how. Maybe somebody can explain it to me, but that's what it's for. It is definitely for borders. And, you know, maybe it's not about the space, but just the fact that you can, you know, just have it close to your body and you're not trying to work on something. Yeah, I'm guessing that it like just so I guess I'm thinking like the widest part of the circle, if you were going to put it on a regular quilt, then you'd only be catching like the bottom part like here in your border. But if you have it as a half circle, I guess that widest part is going to be on the border. So you have more space to quilt your border. So that makes sense. Just did a little geometry there in my brain. So that patchwork place, everybody knows that patchwork place if you've been around for a minute. I don't know. Are they still operating? I don't know. I know I have a bunch of like patterns and books and things that have their little logo on them. Bonnie Lehman's note. I'm not going to read that, but then you got the there's a lot of stuff in here. They've really packed a lot of stuff in here in this index. This quilt is interesting, and it bums me out that it's not in color. But I mean, look at these circles, and you could kind of see. You sort of see the stitching there, these big circles around the stars. And this is interesting. This says it's a 1930 star flag quilt, Amish. Now we can hear our friend, who was a Pennsylvania quilt historian and collector. I can hear her now saying, how do you know it's Amish? We're going to go ahead and assume that the collector, Judy Boyson of New York, knew where she got it from, Wilton, Wisconsin, that she knew that, and we could guess. But it will be in the Small Sensation show at the Great American Quilt Festival. You guys, this is right before the Great American Quilt Festival. So, we looked at that extensively recently. Oh, look at this. This is beautiful. Look at the quilting in this quilt. And this is what I love about these later iterations of Quilter's Newsletter magazine. When Quilter's Newsletter first came out, it was all in black and white. So you'd see these beautiful things, but you couldn't see the color, obviously. And then black and white photography does not always capture the depth, unfortunately. Like, I guess really fine photographs, artists that take photographs in black and white with like silver nitrate film and stuff, they can get this depth. But your average, like just printing something in black and white, it's just, unless you mess around with the contrast, you really just don't get all of this beautiful detail that you can see in color. So I love, when they, I guess, got much greater readership, and then the magazine could evolve. So this is a Rose of Sharon, made by Margaret Wright Dickerson in Missouri, brought to Texas around 1875. And look, this thing has got tassels on the corners. This was a fancy quilt. And then it's got these prairie points along the edge, and then just this, stunning quilting. And in some cases, like it's there, some of it, there's like echo quilting, and then there's this, what looks kind of like matchstick quilting. And I'm assuming that this is Trapunto. It looks stuffed to me. It doesn't look like any of the applique is stuffed, but, definitely these big medallion things are stuffed. So, wow. And then here's a fun one. This is a contemporary quilt over here. Also, something I've noticed when one is trying to look for the centennial, the bicentennial, and the sesquicentennial or the sestercentennial, you unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, unfortunately, you run across all of these states that did the same thing with their bicentennial, centennial, whatever. So this is an example for the Texas 150th. So sestercentennial is 250. Sesquicentennial is 150. Why couldn't they come up with easier words for these things? But yeah, there's an amazing number of states did quilt projects for their, 100, 150, 200 years. It's really interesting. So this one's kind of funny. Look, this is like, Cincinnati, 85. So you've got these sort of historical looking things, but then you've got the Cincinnati Reds, the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm not entirely, like, this looks like Oktoberfest. I'm not sure why there's maybe there's a Six Flags or something, because this looks like a roller coaster and an Eiffel Tower. So yeah, Seasons of Cincinnati. So that looks really cute. The Quilt Digest. So this was a publication, but the Quilt Digest itself, I think there were 5 issues of it. And these are really more like books. I would say if you don't have copies of this, they're pretty easy to find, like on Abe Books. Not terribly expensive. I want to say there's maybe one, or it might be like this one, and one of the other ones might be a little bit more difficult to find, but I want to say that I purchased my whole collection of them one at a time, and they didn't cost me more than $5 or $6 a piece. But these were great. They reminded me very much of Quilt Folk. I think they did have a little bit of advertising, but their advertising might have been Quilt Digest advertising, like, you want the rest of the books, then here's the order form. So just really beautiful black and white and color pictures. And this was published by Michael Kyle and Roderick Kirikoff. Roderick, still very involved in the quilt world. I would call him, I guess, retired now. I don't know that he republished his one major book. Was it 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago? Quilt Folk helped him republish his big book. And I am drawing a complete blank on the name of it, but it's a really good book. I have the first edition, and it's a fantastic book. But you also see some of the other names that are associated here. We've got Penny McMorris and Shelley Ziegert. Nancy Callahan and Sue Ellen Meyer are also people that I'm familiar with, but Shelley Ziegert, still very involved in AQSG, and Penny McMorris, she's still out there lecturing. So, again, this is 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, still lots going on here. Same people still doing stuff. This was a 2-page spread, by the way. I got excited because I was like, oh my gosh, I have all of these books. I have collected all of these books over the years. So we've got the art quilt, which was a big deal in 1986. That was definitely like new and innovative stuff that was coming out in the quilting world. Remember Me and Homage to Amanda. These were really beautiful books about historical quilts. I think Remember Me was about friendship quilts. And then you have the other issues of the Quilt Digest. I'm really not doing an ad for Quilt Digest. They published some really good books. Okay. Here is Indian teepees. Here is the pattern. And you could see kind of how it goes together. And it's definitely like you would piece a Lone Star. I mean, because essentially these are the tips of Lone Stars, essentially, just turned inward. So, not terribly difficult, but to get these things nice and neat and have your points meet and everything, you'd have to be very careful with your piecing. So here are some interesting ads, and so the turtles I noticed right away, and so did Double T. And it's funny because I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I've ever mentioned this to you guys, but I collect patterns and kits from this time period, and I have a lot of them that are like animal related. Part of it was, I had collected cut and sews for a very long time, which those are the panel, if you're not familiar, the panels of fabric you could buy that had like a doll or something printed on them, and you basically are just cutting it out and sewing them together to make a stuffed thing. And then it kind of led to me collecting some pattern or some kits that were kind of similar things. And then my husband, because he works in wildlife, he's a park manager and he's worked in wildlife rehabilitation some. He also collects bird-related things. So I had bought a bunch of patterns and kits and stuff to make stuffed birds. And I've added a few things to his collection. So anyway, long story short, I like it. I like these things. There's even lots of contemporary pattern designers that, make animals, stuffies. They've never gone out of style. If you go to any local quilt shop that has a good selection of patterns, you're going to find cute little animals. So these never go out of style. And then the other thing I loved right here, the applique vest pattern. Because if the 80s were not known for anything quilt related but this, it would be the quilt vest. It was such a thing. It's just, that was so funny. And in fact, I think one of my other reference books here might have, I don't think I flagged it, but I do know I saw a whole article in there about making vests. All right. So calendar of events. I always love to look at calendars of events in, craft and fiber and whatnot magazines. And inevitably, there's not really a whole lot of stuff going on in a lot of places. So, these days you'll see, California's got some stuff. The Mid-Atlantic's got some stuff. New England's got some stuff. Sometimes there's something in Florida. There's the stuff in the middle of the country. Texas is a big state. Sometimes they have stuff. But, to find something that's happening in Maryland, where I am, which is a pretty small state, or Virginia, which is, where my mom lives, or, just north of me in Pennsylvania or Delaware. Granted, a lot of things do happen in our area as far as events, just because of, we're just got a lot of people here. But it's just not as much as it used to be. And that is definitely evidenced by this calendar of events. I mean, there's 2 events in Alabama. There's multiple there's 2 events in Alabama, 1 in Arkansas. I mean, you don't always see a whole lot of interesting stuff going on in like all kinds of states, and we're going to keep going and you'll see. But before we move on, check these out. This is that art quilt movement. Let's see. I think Neither of these are by, so this top one is Georgia M. Springer of Raleigh, North Carolina, and this one is Margaret J. Miller of San Marcos, California. Um, yeah, I don't know if either of these women are famous. I mean, it appears that they won ribbons. But these are just so, like, looking at these, definitely that art quilt and, like, using perspective and, things like that was so very popular. Okay, so real quick, running down this list. I mean, California. Look at all the stuff happening in California. Look at Sally Groot. She's our AQSG founder, San Rafael. Florida, Idaho, Illinois. So much going on in Illinois. Indiana, Iowa, Kansas. So much stuff going on, and you just don't see this anymore. You don't see this level of Kentucky, Maryland. Look all this in Maryland. Columbia, Maryland is only like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes drive for me. Hagerstown's about an hour. La Plata, about 45 minutes. Salisbury is probably the farthest away for me. It's probably an hour and a half, hour and 45. But 4 things happening in Maryland in like the second half, because so this would have been April. So looks like these calendars are covering everything from, April to the end of the year. But I mean, this is, see, April 10th and 12th, April 12th through the 13th, April 5th and 6th, April 12th and 13th. I mean, within like what sounds like maybe a week and a half's time, you could go to 4 different things in Maryland. We don't have that anymore. It does not happen anymore. Massachusetts, Michigan, lots of stuff in Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri. I was very excited to see all these. Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York. Of course, we have the Great American Quilt Festival celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. Lots and lots of stuff in New York, North Carolina. And I think that this might finish later on, but you get my point. Like, lots of stuff was going on at this time. The 80s were just like quiltorama for sure. Now this is fun. This was, let's see. They collect slides of unusual, notable quilts so that periodically we can have a special quilt show for our readers. This month, we present applique picture quilts from 2 different quilt makers who have used similar themes in their portraits, along with the pieced picture work of another quilt maker. So, American Gothic, 2 different quilt makers. So this one, let's see, bottom right. Story time for Jenna, or is that the next page? Oh, no, sorry, that's the next page. Okay, top right, below. Where's the discussion of this one? Top right, next page. Well, okay, so below, American Gothic, A New Generation by Jenny Sipe of Stewartstown, Pennsylvania. I love this. This is, I mean, you guys know American Gothic. Everybody knows American Gothic. Okay, so top right, Granddad's Quilt. This is clearly a portrait of this man. And look at the beautiful quilt pattern behind him. Interpretation. Okay, so interpretation here is the other American Gothic. Note, American Gothic was painted by Grant Wood. I believe it was I literally was looking at this the other day. It was sometime, I want to say it was the late 20s, early 30s. And the people that stood for him or sat for him for this portrait, the woman was his sister. The man, you'll never guess unless you know, was his dentist. I was like, I'm hoping the man was a friend in addition to being a dentist. Because, I mean, how do you broach that? You're sitting in the dentist chair, getting a tooth pulled, and you're like, I am painting this picture. It's so funny. Anyway, I thought these were so cool, especially this one is so cute. I mean, how patchworky is that? Look at all of these prints. Oh, so adorable. I love it. And then, so the artist that did this grandpa's quilt, granddad's quilt, also did this one, which is sisters, I think they said on the other page. So really, really, like, portrait quilts are still very popular. You'll see lots of these, you know, when you go to quilt shows. I mean, even QuiltCon, you'll see portrait quilts at QuiltCon. You'll see them at, you know, just the regular guild shows. So, and then these are just very pretty. And this one, what did they say about this one? Let's see. So St. Anne's Cathedral Spires is the one at the top. And this is Storytime for Jenna, both made by Beverly Tremblay of Rochester, New Hampshire. So this was a story quilt. And, you know, I could see that there's, you know, like the lion, Narnia, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. This looks like some type of minaret from some kind of story. We've got a daffodil with a ladybug and a bee and a duck. All kinds of fun stuff. All right. Here we go. Still going on with the calendar. Look at Ohio. You guys, Ohio. So much going on in Ohio. Oklahoma, Oregon. Lots going on in Pennsylvania, as always. Okay, I thought that was something else. Let's see. Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. Lots going on in these places. Not like today, Vermont, Virginia. Culpeper, I love this. Culpeper is a pretty small town, it's particularly back then. It's near where my in-laws lived. And of course, Leesburg, that's kind of right outside of Washington, D.C. And it keeps going. And it gets into, I just saw, did I not see? Yes, Vancouver, British Columbia. It's getting into Canada too. Ontario, England, Scotland. Let's see. I think I marked all of the ads I wanted to look at. So these aren't. Okay. Helen Kelly was one of the columnists. I didn't flag this one to read, but I feel like we're going to have to go back and read some of Helen Kelly's stuff at some point. Feed sack quilts. Look at this. Everybody loves a feed sack, right? Aren't these so pretty? And look at the quilt. I've never seen that pattern like that. But it's just made out of you know, these strips and diamonds, and then the center is just the 4 triangles. And these are fun. These are just so very 1930s, 1940s. This is the one, the butterfly, that it reminds me of, like, I don't know, more of a manta ray than a butterfly. But they were so perfect. These shapes were so perfect for showcasing just those particular prints that you would find on feed sacks. They were, I mean, you guys have all seen feed sacks. Sometimes you'd have something that was tiny print, but more often than not, they would be like kind of a medium print. And I don't know if that was a specific design. I mean, it kind of works out for the things that people were making. And if you've done any research about feed sacks, you know that, you know, as the feed companies realized that people wanted this and they all got in on this game, they were trying to print things that women would like, you know, for curtains and for clothing. So I think like this sort of medium-sized print, you know, would have really enticed people for the clothing aspect. And, you know, they generally work out in quilts unless you're cutting very tiny pieces, and then you only have the color. You don't necessarily have what the design was. So, very pretty stuff. I didn't recognize anything that I have. I don't have a huge collection of feed sacks, but I have a handful. Okay, so this is the pattern. Where is this pattern from? Is this the one on the previous page? Boost Tracks quilt continued. Yeah, I guess so. Okay, so it's this. It's just basically strips of geese, flying geese. Now, it's interesting is if you found that quilt today in a quilting magazine, chances are, well, of course, they're not going to give you these templates like this. They're going to give you the instructions for cutting those, cutting these, utilizing either some type of triangle ruler or some other quick method. And they are probably going to give you the instructions for piecing more than one at a time. And I can never remember how to do it because it's a weird way that you end up doing it. But you end up getting like, I want to say, is it 4 geese at a time? The way you do this piecing. I know I've looked at it a bunch of times and it's not intuitive. You, like, at least for me, I have to look at the instructions every time to like, okay, I think I've only done it once and they didn't turn out very well, which I'm not good at that stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, look, this unit to cut these pieces and then piece it. I'm like, I would do the corner, stitch and flip where you're taking a little rectangle and then 2 squares. So you got a rectangle that big and then 2 squares, and you draw the diagonal on the 2 squares, and then you stitch them here, and then you trim it to your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you flip them out and iron them. So much easier, in my opinion, than doing this. Now, if you're going to hand piece, you do this. You cut your templates. All right. How to tie quilts. This is interesting because I bet you anything, lots of people don't realize that, first of all, tying quilts is a fast way to get a quilt finished. If you don't want to hand quilt and you don't have access to a long arm and you're not willing to wrestle the thing through your regular machine, tying is a great option. And especially with the battings that we have today, you really don't have to tie like very close together. It just keeps it keeps everything in there. But I do know that I've seen people tie quilts like 1 tie at a time. And the way that my mom taught me was you've marked it and you're just going to have a continuous piece of thread that goes through. And then you clip the threads and then you tie them. You're not making 1 tie at a time. That escaped me the first time I tied a quilt. And my mother was like, I want to say was it the quilt I made when I was 16? I think it was. And my mother's like, what are you doing? You need to flatten that out and just do 1 long piece of thread, right? And do the thing. And so, and so. All right. Now this is a fun one. I'm going to read you this one because I know she wouldn't mind. This one is by Mrs. Barbara Brackman. And this is called Connecticut Collection. And so you can see these different quilt blocks. Now, this one is lovely. This oak, Yankee Charm, Yankee Pride. Look at this one, Mountain Laurel. Looks like marijuana. Very cute things. So, and then these. So you can see this is a time period, I think, when she's working through her encyclopedia of quilt blocks. So it starts off, as one of the 13 original colonies, Connecticut has a quilt making tradition going back to the era of the whole cloth quilt in pre-revolution, pre-patchwork days. But the search for patterns named for the state is not so fruitful as it sometimes is for newer states with shorter histories in quilt making. It seems that the number of state-named patterns is related more to the number of pattern companies, newspaper columns about quilt making, and pattern designers that have been located in the state rather than to the length of the quilt making tradition. Connecticut, thus, has fewer patterns than states such as Iowa or Kansas, where many pattern sources were located in the 1930s. However, there are certainly enough Connecticut patterns to stitch a Connecticut sampler quilt. Connecticut, which is this one, in a, by the way, robbing Peter to pay Paul setting. So Connecticut, number one, was the pattern selected to represent the state in Hearth and Home magazine's state series that ran in the first decade of the 20th century. A second Connecticut, number two, appeared in the 1930s in the Nancy Page quilt column syndicated to newspapers around the country. So that's this one right here. A reader from Weston, Connecticut sent the pattern writing that she thought it looked just like the state, neat and tidy. In 1937, a farm journal offered Connecticut Star, which is the one on the right, a variation of a pattern more familiar as Dove at the Window or Four Birds, because careful shading of the diamonds reveal birds flying toward the center of the block. And I think it's this, like that, I guess, is sort of supposed to be bird-like. Hartford, which is this one here on the left, the state capital, was remembered with a pattern in Hearth and Home's second series of patterns named for the state capitals during the teens. In 1945, a farm journal published an unusual version of an 8-pointed star named Hope of Hartford, which is this one here on the right. The name may relate to an early Dutch settlement near Hartford, which was a trading post called the House of Good Hope. Connecticut's history is most strongly represented in the series of Charter Oak applique designs. The Charter Oak legend describes how the English King Charles II gave early Connecticut colonists a charter guaranteeing democratic self-government. So this is the Charter Oak. A later ruler, James II, sent an emissary to seize the charter and take away their rights. But clever columnists kept the emissary waiting through long and windy speeches until after dark. Before he could carry away their charter, the candles were mysteriously snuffed, and when they were relit, the charter had disappeared, hidden, the story goes, in a large hollow oak. The Charter Oak and the legend remained as important symbols through the American Revolution and the early years of the Republic. I've never heard this story before, but it is fascinating. In 1856, the enormous tree blew down in a storm. Today, a stone monument stands near the site of the tree in the city of Hartford. It is tempting to believe, as a few romantically inclined writers have, that the Charter Oak quilt patterns have been around since colonial days. But it is far more likely that the patterns like Charter Oak, this one, from, Charter Oak 6, which is the one we're looking at, which was shown in Marie Webster's 1915 book, Quilts, Their Story and How to Make Them, which we have looked at, and Charter Oak number 10, which is on the next page. Which is this. I like that one. Let's see, Charter Oak number 10 from Ruth Finley's 1929 Old Patchwork Quilts and the Women Who Made Them, which we have also read, originated in the middle of the 19th century. Like other quilt patterns named for events and people of the 18th century or earlier, the pattern was more likely named in the 19th or 20th centuries by patriotic or sentimental quilt makers, commemorating events of the distant past. The death of the legendary tree in 1856 coincides with a period of growth in the number of quilt block designs and of an increase in symbolic names for patterns. So we can guess that Charter Oak patterns memorialize the old tree's passing rather than the hiding of the charter. For a compilation of more Charter Oak designs, see Ione McIntyre, Ione Bank McIntyre's 1981 book, American History in Patchwork Patterns, The Charter Oak. So that's the book I'm not familiar with, but it sounds like it's all about these oak blocks. Today, the state tree is the white oak, the same species as the charter oak. So a charter oak design can serve to commemorate the state tree as well as Connecticut history. The state flower is the mountain laurel, this marijuana-looking plant. The design was pictured in Carrie Hal's and Rose Kretzinger's 1935, The Romance of the Patchwork Quilt in America, which of course we are familiar with. The state bird is the American robin, which is right here. If you want to include a pictorial representation piece in your Connecticut quilt, there's the red robin right here from the Laura Wheeler Alice Brooks Newspaper Syndicate. And I can tell you, I've looked at a number of Laura Wheeler Alice Brooks patterns. They're always very odd. They always involve really complicated insets. And I definitely have seen quilts made from these patterns out there in the world, but my gosh, there are not that many of them that I can find, because either people made them and kept them because they were so darn hard to make and impressed upon their family. Don't you ever get rid of this quilt? It was so darn hard to make. Or people just never made them because they involved, I mean, just like you can see, like this line here is not quite a straight line. Maybe it should be. I don't know. It should be a straight line, but I mean, you can tell there is just complicated inset piecing here, and you've got curves. So these quilts, I've made one block, and I did it paper piecing style because I could not for the life of me figure out how else to do it, because the piecing was so complicated. So Laura Wheeler, Alice Brooks. Or to symbolize the state bird, you might shade the diamonds in your Connecticut star a robin's breast red, or color the small squares in bird's nest, which is this one right here, bird's nest, a robin's egg blue. To summarize the historic charm and natural beauty of the nutmeg state, now I did not know that Connecticut was the nutmeg state, you can include a Yankee charm, which is this, a novel arrangement of some traditional quilt design elements that appeared in the Nancy Cabot column of the Chicago Tribune in the 1930s. To symbolize the pride Connecticut Yankees take in their state, don't forget Yankee Pride from Ruth Finley's book. That's this right here. And I love this one. I think that's a really pretty pattern. If you might notice, so you've got a star in the center. Is that a Lemoyne star? I'm always getting my star names wrong, but you've got the star in the center. And then these pieces up here, obviously still the star diamonds, but put a stem and a leaf on that. You've got a tulip or a Carolina lily. I want to say Carolina lilies have three diamonds, I think. And the tulip has 4. So, and then you've got the leaves down here. So the Yankee Pride is made up of a star and 4 tulips or 4 Carolina lily, whatever. And so anyway, she says, here in the next 2 pages, you'll find directions and patterns for 5 quilt block patterns to get you started on a Connecticut sampler. So what fun. And here's the charter oak. You've got the piecing. And, if you've looked at a modern contemporary quilt magazine today, they have the same piecing instructions. That's something that has been copied from the past. You didn't always necessarily see that in some of the older patterns like, Ladies' Home Journal and all the ones that go back in time. Let's see, this one is Hartford. Hope of Hartford. Look at this. Look at all these ducks. It would not be the 80s if there weren't ducks to put on your quilts. Okay, so this is the other one. I'm not going to read this, but I want to show you a few things. So you may not recognize her, but that is Paula Nadelstern. I wish I could say I'm friends with Paula Nadelstern. I'm not. I would call her an acquaintance, a very friendly acquaintance. I have had lunch with her in New York. I have hung out with her, listened to her talk about her own quilts. But these are her early quilts. So different than what she does today. But they're also so very interesting. And if you remember when we looked at the Great American Quilt Festival, Paula was the New York winner. And her quilt was very different than what other people had done because, many of the quilters, because it was about the Statue of Liberty, they had taken the tact of either, representing the Statue of Liberty or representing something about freedom. And where Paula went with it was, memories of her grandmother. And her grandmother was an immigrant, had come through Ellis Island. And so what you saw in her quilt was all of these different picture frames with these little pictures, quilted pictures, stories, quote unquote stories in there. And it was just very touching. And I think it really captured, this idea of, immigrant stories and, what the Statue of Liberty at that time was symbolizing to people, etc. So I think she is a very, very creative quilter. So anyway, she was doing this stuff. I mean, these kind of piecing, this border piecing is, very art quilty. But then she's got what is so obviously storytelling in here. This one I just love. I think this one's called, it's a Katie's quilt or Katie's Butterflies. And I don't know if Katie is her daughter. I'm not sure. I could be totally speaking on a turn. I know she does have at least one daughter. But look who owns this. Pia Zadora. Pia Zadora owns that quilt, or owned that quilt. I don't know if Pia Zadora is still alive. But she was famous. She was an actress. I thought that was so cool when I was flipping through and I'm like, wait, Pia Zadora. So very cool. And these are from collections. I mean, people were buying Paula's quilts. And I mean, she was already building a name for herself at this point in the 80s. And now you can see more of the storytelling that she was doing in these quilts. These are all houses. So this is a house for all seasons. So it says this quilt was hand appliqued and machine pieced by parents, grandparents, staff, and friends of the Amalgamated Nursery School under the direction of Paula. And so I don't know if that was, I might find out if I read the article, but I don't know if that was maybe where her children or her child went to nursery school. And this one is just beautiful, the colors. And, and this is, it's kind of got some traditional looking piecing to it, but it's very modern. This is very like that studio art quilting, very, very big takeoff from what we see as traditional look. And then this obviously is, very abstract, and I mean, looks like a painting to me. So as I was skimming this, I noticed that be ribbon work. So let me flip back to this other page. So it talks about she didn't appreciate her talents until one day in the crowded gymnasium of the Northern Star Quilters Guild, she sees the first quilt she ever entered in a show, and she's astonished to see it won a ribbon. And they mention it here. It was shown in Quilters Newsletter magazine number 156. Do I have that issue? You bet I do. And let me switch back so I can just show you, because I didn't take a picture of this one. This is called, it's called the Fairy Tale Quilt. And unfortunately, the photograph is not super. But these are, they are fairy tale stories in each of the blocks. And this one they did a close-up of is The Princess and the Pea. So you can see all the mattresses in the bed, and then the princess is up here at the top. And this she sent in herself, and she wrote to Bonnie Lehman and said, "Dear Bonnie, I feel as if sending a slide of my a slide. Now, these days, you just attach a a PDF or a JPEG to an email. This time, if you wanted something published in a magazine, they needed slides. They didn't necessarily want photographs. They needed a slide because then they could enlarge it. So she says, I feel as if sending a slide of my fairy tale quilt is the final step in the long process of creating it. The awareness that an opportunity existed to share my project at its end with Quilters Newsletter magazine was an encouraging and supportive influence during the years it took to complete. During the year. So it took her a year to make this. I found that working in applique blocks accommodates my idiosyncratic quilting style. Designing each block individually did not demand the elaborate pre-planning which I admire but seem incapable of performing. Since I am always so anxious to begin, resolving the problem of creating a finished quilt which presented a pleasing and coherent visual effect rather than a piece comprised of separate blocks was rewarding. Although I am drawn to quilts of a few well-chosen fabrics, I am personally aroused by dipping my fingers through boxes of scraps in search of potential color combinations. I enjoyed foraging through lace collections, scrutinizing boxes of beads, and accepting inspiration from a piece of rickrack. Now, if you remember, grandmother's wall quilt that she did for the Great American Quilt Festival, she went to like the garment district in New York to like the little haberdashers where they had like the trims and laces and the buttons and all the things. And she gathered up what she had in her collection. And then I think she got more. And so this was definitely an important piece of her work at the time, was all of this extra stuff. The quilt measures 72 by 72. It is hand appliqued and embroidered, machine pieced, with the exception of the 9 Seminole style diamonds in the border, which were appliqued. And so that's these little pieces on the border. And hand quilted. Many of the characters are adapted to applique from children's books and posters. I used black silk thread to embroider facial expressions and details. Then I asked Lynn Della Posta to quilt it for me. It won the blue ribbon in the special materials category at a quilt show sponsored by the Northern Star Quilters Guild in Somers, New York in April 1983. Paula Nadelstern of the Bronx. So this is her early work. Now, as I was organizing my Quilters Newsletter magazines, which I have stolen from my mother and are mine to keep forever, I'm flipping through, and in 1995, my mother had a subscription, so got her little label, and look what I noticed right away. I did not need to read the details. I knew by looking, this is a Paula Nadelstern quilt. So you can see in like 9 years' time, she has gone from these storytelling type quilts to what has become her signature, which is the kaleidoscope. So that's something that is fascinating to me, not just because I've met Paula and I've had lunch with her. humble brag. But that it's so exciting to see a contemporary artist and what her trajectory has looked like. From these early quilts where she's just discovering quilting, she's discovering her voice, and she's trying different things. She's making several quilts in a very similar style. She's teaching others to make a quilt, this one, in a similar style. And then she's like, at some point, transitions to this, and it's very different. And today, I mean, so this is 1995, right? May 95. What is 30 years ago? Paula has been iterating on her kaleidoscopes for 30 years now, and they're just as beautiful. And I would bet if you put them side by side, this quilt with one that she's made very recently, I guarantee you would again be able to point out the differences, like you know, the changes she has made, or the risks she takes, or the intricacy that is developed. So I just thought that was so cool that I could just, within these handful of magazines I have, be able to show this. All right. So moving on from Paula, I'm going to be able to finish this and read some. Talking It Over by Jean Ray Laurie. I think maybe I will not read this one today. I'm going to come back to it because I think it's got some really good advice in it. But the question was, on several occasions, I've been asked to talk to groups about quilting and bring my work, but sometimes it doesn't seem to be appreciated. Interesting to hear what she has to say. Just about, I think, every magazine, and I mean, even today's quilting magazines will have a page that has really basic lessons, which I think is always nice because I know it can be really, really, and this one looks like these are serial lessons. So trying to get you to subscribe. But I think it's cool to have sort of beginner type information in magazines because I think it can be just really, really overwhelming. Oh, you know what? I just realized I'm showing you something that I don't have up on the screen. Sorry, guys. All right, let me go back. So, Jean Ray Laurie article, you didn't miss anything. How to make a quilt. This is the lessons for beginners. But what I was trying to say is I think for beginners, even a very simple quilt project in a magazine might seem overwhelming. But when you have some information, you know, in step-by-steps, then it suddenly becomes a little less daunting. So I think that this is something that certainly Quilters... Was Quilters Newsletter Magazine the first to do it? I don't know. Probably not. But they certainly kept this up in every issue. Some kind of instruction for newbies. And certainly the magazines will still do that today. This is cute. This is a little wall hanging called Coffee and Cake. And this reminds me so much of like Lori Holt. And some of the contemporary designers that do these sort of cute little farmhouse things. Now, again, this looks like it could be some more complex piecing because, you know, again, we've got the pieces here and not any instructions about, you know, make X number of units that look like this. And it's a stitch and flip kind of situation. But, you know, it's still very cute and very reminiscent of things that we see today. The Meet and Place. I love the Meet and Place because that was the Paula Nadelstern article was Meet and Place. And then this lady, Harriet Merriam, she was 101 years old. I love that. Road to California. You still hear about that today. I assume they're still doing it. I know, at least until recently. Aunt Sally's Lament. This looks like a fun poem. The Calico Braided Rug Pattern. How many of you have done one of those? I know my grandmother did. The Electric Hot Pen that cuts stencils, aka a desktop soldering iron, is what that is. And the whole kit was almost $25. That's interesting because so you get the Mylar and this thing. Yeah, that was kind of pricey back then for that stuff. Not for shopkeepers only. Jeffrey Gutchen. He was a writer, and a lot of times his rants, these were rants, was about, you know, running a shop or shopping at shops, quilt shops. And he seemed, I don't know anything about him, the history of Jeffrey Gutchen, but he just always seems to have something angry to say. Every time I forget about him, and then I'll pick up an issue during this time period when he was doing this column, and I'll be like, what is up with Jeffrey Gutchen? Quilters Forum. I thought this was interesting. This is quilt-related concerns and causes. So this is like yet another thing, a person that has written, who wrote this? This was Paula Davidson. You know, just about the things that are on people's minds. You do not see stuff like this. You know, there are magazines that like the last page might have like kind of an essay like this, but you don't see this kind of writing anymore, at least in my opinion. These were fun. This was just some pictorial piecing of schoolhouses, different ones, different houses. I think we looked at a bunch of schoolhouse quilts a while back, didn't we? And then here's the pattern. Book reviews. Don't ever pick up a Quilter's Newsletter magazine without looking at the book reviews, because you will discover books you did not have, you did not know existed, that you will need. And by the way, I noticed this. Look at this little adorable doll and her adorable little quilt. There's patterns for all of this. And her little bed. And by the way, her name is Stephanie. I was like, Stephanie's quilt and Stephanie's bed. Yes, please. I love it. So adorable. The bulletin board was just randomness. And I love that too. Just, little tips and tricks. The quilting bee, this is where people, again, we're writing into Bonnie Lehman. That's where Paula had sent the picture of her fairy tale quilt in here. And, these were things women were making these beautiful quilts and sending them in, and obviously getting, I don't want to say quote unquote discovered, but kind of discovered in some cases, based on what they were making. This is adorable. Look at this. So of course, this Pennsylvania Dutch Amish looking thing, obviously very popular. But look at this little diorama. A miniature quilt shop by Candace Gilmore and Susie Peterson. Look at this thing. Is this not the cutest thing you've ever seen? They've got the little counter and all the little bolts of fabric. This little sale bin. The dog's in there. They have the sample quilt up. They've got their little Amish lady shopper. Oh my gosh. And oh, look at the little Quilters Newsletter magazines back here. The cutest thing ever. All right. And then we have our armchair shopping center, which I'm not going to go through right now, but look at the rates. 85 cents a word. If you want it in a colored box, you're going to pay $1.50 a word. And if you want to utilize the professional services directory and special events on the next page, that will be $2 a word. So at the time, I did not count any of these, but you can see people really thought carefully about what they were going to put to save money. You can tell. If I'm going to spend $1.50 a word for my shaded box, I'm going to get to the point really fast. I love that. These are things that we don't necessarily deal with anymore, right? And here's the professional services directory that you were paying $2 a word for. Then I love this. This is the Quilters Exchange. So you've got people that want to be needle and pin pals. Adorable, right? And so it's just like, who are you looking to talk to? This woman's looking to talk to American and English quilters, new quilters with young children, people interested in Amish quilts or who live in Amish areas. Quilters who are wives of pastors. That's super niche, right? That lady's in New Zealand. Quilters living in rural Great Britain. So not just Great Britain, but rural Great Britain. And she's in Maryland. I guess she wants to talk to some English quilters. Quilting groups in foreign countries. Quilters with small children in the US and Canada. You never see anything like that. Now we don't need to. We've got Facebook groups. Then you've got all these quilt clubs and all these different places. Very cool. You might very well, discover a club, or you got some people in your neck of the woods who might be interested in starting one. And then this is a swap list. I am looking for XYZ. I love this. I want quilt storybooks for children. I want this particular Vogue pattern. I'm looking for the instructions for Busilla quilt, blah, 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 Heavenly Rose. Again, things that are probably put on Facebook, may or may not get seen by millions of people. Who knows? But yeah, I will trade my quilters newsletter numbers, blah, 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 for your quilters newsletter numbers, blah, blah, blah. I love it. The scrapbook. This is stuff that's reprinted from other places. And there's some weird stuff in here. Some people just born to it. This is stuff that was printed from interviews with quilters of Appalachian origins. And so some of them are funny. Some of them are poignant and quaint. Some I don't understand. My man drinks out at night. I do it to keep my mind from worrying. Does she quilt to keep from worrying while her man is out drinking? Does she too drink at night? I don't know. I'm guessing that she's talking about she quilts so she doesn't worry about him while he's out drinking, is my suspicion. There's a little snippet from Carrie Hal from Patchwork Quilts, not Hoopskirts and Nudity. And then, here's just, some other randomness. Still the Quilting Bee write-ins, somebody's pattern, or somebody's quilt. This one's got a lot of dense quilting on it. Look at these butterflies. Lovely. How about a mountain retreat in Lake Tahoe? That sounds fun. Quilting, doll making, and Brazilian embroidery. What is Brazilian embroidery? I don't know. Walda Dombacher was teaching that. Sounds so fascinating. Eleanor Peace Bailey and Julie Jensen were doing doll making. Eleanor Peace Bailey, if you don't know who she was a doll maker, very famous. I think she only passed away a few years ago. That was during the pandemic or right before it. So yeah, again, you see names in here that are just like household names to quilters today. And this is the back page. Polyfill, an investment in the future. Indeed, because the fabric may rot right off your quilt, assuming you used cotton fabric, but your polyester batting will last forever. Oh my goodness. All right. So I was not looking at the chat, so I apologize. All right. Oh my goodness. Okay. I missed a whole bunch. Oh, hey BFD. Okay. So let me just go through. You guys chatted a lot. So Mishral was a freshman in high school in April 86. All right. So girl, you're only a year older than me. Robin was at home with a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old. Oh. So Robin was looking to see only books printed by Martingale. So that was the Patchwork place, right? BFD, you know what? I am always happy to see you. Work has been killing you, but that's probably a good thing, right? This is your season, right? It's getting to be warmer weather, and I would imagine the work that you do is probably more outdoors. So I'm happy that you can join us whenever, as Robin said for me. And you know what? Druid beating you up. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. Unconventional, unexpected. Thank you, Robin. If I had the chat up for whatever reason, it's not coming up on my OBS screen. So, but yes, Unconventional and Unexpected was Roderick Karakov's book that was reissued by Quilt Folk. I think it's going on like 3 years now, 2 or 3 years, but fantastic book. Even if you get the first edition of it, is still a wonderful book. From the School for Inquiring Minds, yes. Uh-oh. Did I freeze? Okay. Sorry. He was probably just an old curmudgeon. I assume you're talking about Gutchin. Yeah, I'm assuming. I don't know what his deal was. I should probably figure out who he was. I mean, assume maybe he's still alive. I don't know. But to find out exactly who he was. So, all right. Okay. Eleanor Peace Bailey passed away in 2023. So yes, it was very recently. I just remember as a kid, my mom loved her. I have one of her books. If you don't know who she is, and just out of curiosity and have a chance, Google her, because her stuff is interesting. It's just, she was one of those people that I think she just had her own style, and she did mostly dolls, but she also put together some patterns. I have one that's it's a sunbonnet Sioux quilt, and it's just a little tiny like 4-block thing, but it came with the pattern for a sunbonnet Sioux doll also. So of course I got that on eBay at some point to put in my sunbonnet Sioux collection. But just, she's such an interesting lady. She was such an interesting artist. So all right, so we have about 20 minutes. Maybe go over today a little bit, depending on what this next chapter is. We are, of course, I am talking about, this one might be a longer chapter. Yeah, I think this is a longer chapter. We might have to stop in the middle. Oh gosh, it's a really long chapter. Okay. Yeah, this is a long chapter with lots of pictures, so we're definitely can get into this one a little bit, and I'll finish it up later. So Carrie Hal, of course. As a reminder, we are reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity. I don't want Twitch to be mad at me. Oh, Robin said, oh my gosh, a local quilt shop is really good friends with her, and she was always at the quilt show in Reno. Yes, she was an oddball lady, I bet. She always sang "We Are Family" by Sister Sledge when she gave presentations. Yes, I have heard that about her. She was just one of those people that, like, so if you're a true crime person like me, you always will hear, when somebody is gone, you'll hear, oh, they lit up a room when they walked in. And I think that is so not true for most people. No, when I am dead and gone, nobody is going to say, oh, Stephanie, she lit up a room when she walked in. Because no, I don't. I usually slink in and hide in the back. But Eleanor Peace Bailey had such a personality and like presence. She was definitely the kind of person that like walked in, lit up a room, and people were like, ah. She definitely, you could say that about her. So, all right. Carrie Hal, 1938. The chapter we are reading is chapter 6, A Hodgepodge of Fashions, 1906 to 1916. So this is interesting. This is, we're at the turn of the century. It's just before World War I. So what does she have to say? If variety is the spice of life, then we must admit that the fashions of the early years of the 20th century were highly seasoned. For the fashion trends of this period spent themselves lavishly in every direction. There was a veritable hodgepodge of fashions because of the great number of designs in skirts, sleeves, and hats. Fashions had become so cosmopolitan that although Paris was still general headquarters of la mode, it was not the leader of fashion in the sense that it formerly was. Yes, as we found out in the last chapter, the French would make fun of the Americans until the Americans just went, up who on you, we got our own thing. And then people went, oh, so the Americans do have their own thing. Every leading house had its own particular mode or design, and if there was any keynote to fashion at this time, it was diversity. This tendency had been growing since the beginning of the century, and it was exceedingly difficult to follow the increasingly diversified fancies. Women no longer acquiesced blindly to the dictates of the autocrats of the Rue de la Paix or the Place Vendôme. I'm probably not pronouncing those right, but showed more and more a tendency to hold themselves back from adopting or popularizing every fanciful mode that was presented to them under the guise of fashion. They were beginning to realize that to be in the fashion, purely and simply, was impossible, for the modes had become heterogeneous enough to resolve themselves into mere matters of individual fancy.
There were many who listened as eagerly as ever, but instead of accepting the mandates of fashion as a whole, as in former years, they picked here a bit and there another, and by the use of refined taste and common sense, were able to refuse many of the absurdities offered and dress themselves according to the highest standard, the ideal itself. Although fashion had literally lost herself under the number of designs that came into use at this time, certain new tendencies began to take effect. The shorter walking skirt, about 4 inches from the floor. Now, go get yourself a ruler and measure from the floor up 4 inches. We're talking about that much. Your ankles will be on view. People will see your ankles. They talk about how the Roaring 20s were, I would say the turn of the century when ankles came into view as being like quite stunning. Let's see. The unlined skirt, the improved straight front silhouette, all of American inception, and a desire for freedom from the restrictions of fashion by women who were entering the business world and participating in outdoor sports. So I would say definitely, the Industrial Revolution, opportunities for women in the workplace, and sports. That's really what brought us to showing our ankles. One of the most ridiculous of all the eccentric effects of this period was the sheath gown with its tube-like silhouette, which eventually developed into the hobble skirt. The long, narrow silhouette of the sheath gown, with its languid lines unbroken by a frill, was given a further elongation by the introduction of the empire waistline and the almost entire abandonment of the petticoat. So now you've got these long gown like skirts, but they're not poofed out. They're just sort of long and drapey, which we see like in full force in the 30s. Hemlines went like this, right? Also, it's interesting where she's talking about the introduction of the empire waistline, but the empire waist was really big in the early 1800s. So we've kind of almost got this like 100 years later, it comes back. There's this picture here, elaborate evening gowns elaborate evening toilettes, 1907. So to me, those ladies look very Gibson girlish with that hair. And now you see these dresses definitely do not have petticoats. The hips, there's no big bustle. These are, more natural silhouettes. The ever-changing fashion was whirling backward to the period known as the French Reconstruction in the early part of the 19th century, when women abandoned stays and wore gowns that were made to eliminate all lines. They hung straight from the shoulder like a chemise and were fashioned from the sheerest fabrics and worn with almost no underclothing. This modified revival of that earlier fashion was called by several names: the chemise dress, the tube dress, and the pillow slip dress. So, So, Jared, you're hearing an echo? Okay. That's weird. Sometimes it helps to like I know when I've had trouble to like reload the page, like reload the Twitch page, see if that helps any. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think it might be your sound card or something, like doing some kind of like, I'm sorry. Oh, I hate that. It's like feedback. Yeah, I'm wondering if it's like, are your speakers feeding back into your computer? That could be it. I know sometimes that happens to me. So, well, you can just watch my lips move. If I need to, I'll type. So real quick before we keep going, let's look at these pictures. She's got lots of pictures in this chapter. So, okay. So this first one is French Fashions, 1907. So, yeah, pretty much the same as those evening gowns. And then this one. This is very fashionable looking. It's big hats. Those are princess dress and tailored street suit. So that would be like, you know, you're going out to conduct some business. And then this is costume for the older matron. Street costume for afternoon wear, 1908. So this, I guess, would be what I would have to wear as an older matron. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine, like, people of this era, you know, or this era, 1907, looking at what I'm wearing? I'm wearing a giant sweatshirt dress. It's actually hot because it's kind of warm today. And yeah, they would probably look at me and go, I don't even know what to say to you. I don't know what this garment is that you're wearing. To the eye of a mere man, it looked like a stovepipe. So this tube dress, without even a joint to relieve the absolutely up and down perpendicular effect. Well, the thing is that if they cinch it in with a sash, it's not weird looking. The hobble skirt, as it evolved in 1910, was tight and scant, ignoring the hips entirely, keeping the lines of the figure as flat and narrow as possible, and was tied in below the knees so that graceful walking was out of the question. So I didn't realize that they actually cinched this thing in below your knees. I just thought it was just like a skinny tube of fabric, but apparently it's tied further in. Any walking at all was impossible except in a mincing manner. So I guess that's what they mean by that little hobble. How loud and deep and long should have been the laughter occasioned by a look at any full-length mirror. Well may Burns have said of this fashion, "Oh, wad some power of the gifty Gaius to see ourselves as others see us." Sorry, it's what some power the gift gives us to see ourselves as others see us. I don't know that Burns is difficult to read, I guess. Pulpit and press alike assailed it, but fashion has a way of ignoring ridicule and marching majestically onward. The Carroll Press of Boston thus caricatured it. "Hobble, hobble, little skirt, how I wonder what thou wert. Perchance may be a papa's pant, now for him a trifle scant." My guess is they were trying to get at the fact that a hobble skirt looks like a pant leg. To counteract this menace to life and liberty, several different types of skirt were tried out. Some designers advised the return of the old-time bell skirt, but the desire for something new and novel seemed paramount, and this semi-revival was not favorably received. Another type offered was a freak fashion called jupes culotte, otherwise the harem skirt or Turkish trousers for women, culottes. They're talking about culottes. Many prominent Parisian dressmakers urged its adoption, and a few American designers sponsored its development. But like the attempts of Mrs. Bloomer and her rational costume, this new fashion met with no response from the feminine world and therefore failed to develop any influence over fashion trends. A slit in the side of the hobble skirt was the next device tried, and it had a vogue for a short time, but failed to meet the approval of the majority. It too was abandoned. Well, I mean, let's fast forward to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. A slim dress or slim skirt with a slit up the side. Everybody does that. The very modest woman filled in the slash with a pleating of silk or chiffon. Others let their bright-colored petticoats flash in and out as they walked. Oh, gasp! Not only can I see your ankle, but I can see your petticoats swinging in and out of this slash in your skirt. In Virginia, a certain legislator introduced a bill to regulate women's dress, but the bill was killed by an overwhelming majority vote. No doubt. No doubt those men like looking at ankles. No doubt those who voted against it were thinking of their reception at home if the bill had become a law. The last expedient was to shorten the skirt enough that the feet could be moved, even if the knees were still so tightly bound that it was impossible to step onto a curb or into a streetcar or an automobile. Well, that's why you hike your skirt up. The new fashions, beginning with the sheath gown and the gradual elimination of the petticoat, were disastrous to manufacturers, as the yardage now used for women's clothes was but a small fraction of that used in former years. Many efforts were made to interest designers in fashions requiring more material. One of these was an effort to introduce a panier effect, which met with scant favor. This was later developed into what was known as the peg-topped skirt, with an extra allowance of materials bunched at the hips, or in some models left hanging loose in a long loop at each side, with the necessary narrowing of the bottom of the skirt to give the effect of a huge top. Well, that's weird looking, but also not so different than pegging your jeans like we did in the 80s. An innovation hailed with joy by most women was the entire disappearance of the high-boned collar. It was replaced by a variety of low necklines used on all types of dresses. Many older women and those who thought it immodest to go without their necks uncovered wore what was known as a gimp or a gwimp. It's G-U-I-M-P-E. I suspect it's probably a gimp is how it was. Yeah, a gimp. Sounds right. Okay. This was a sort of yoke, the neckline of which was finished with a high-standing collar, such as had been used in the dresses and worn under the new low-necked dress. These were made of sheer lace or a fine white net to give the illusion of a low neckline and yet cover the bare throat. So this would have been like a dickie or a plastron, I'm assuming, but it's made of like lacy fabric so that it's just, just covering up. Good Lord, somebody could see your décolletage. Another innovation was the kimono sleeve and the effect it had upon the construction and lines of the bodice. This sleeve sounded the death knell of the back fastening and those complicated side and shoulder openings, which were such a trial to all husbands. Of course, that would be the husbands of ladies who were not rich enough to have a lady's maid to help them get dressed. X-ray dresses, oh my, as the name indicates, were of striking transparency. Oh my goodness. But instead of making them undesirable, it seemed to add to their popularity, and they were worn on the street as well as in the home. What were they wearing underneath? I mean, on the red carpet, you see all kinds of things underneath a transparent dress, but this is interesting. There was a decided effort on the part of dressmakers to bring back the robe de style, or period gown, for formal wear. But even without the exaggerated effect of the 1860 incarnation, it did not meet the requirements of modern life, so did not become a general favorite. Of the idiosyncrasies of the period was the reverses, which were met on every hand. Hats and suits were trimmed with leather, and shoe tops were of silk. Some were embroidered or even hand-painted, and the cretonnes, velours, velvets, and plushes, as well as the heavy linens of the upholstery department, were being used for coats and costumes. And here is a picture of When Extremes Meet, 1912. So I'm guessing this lady on the left is considered like the tailored lady. She's very... she's very buttoned up, very slim, very, clean lines. And then you've got the maximalist over here. I mean, look at that muff she's got. Okay, and that sounded really dirty, but we're talking about the thing that she's got her hands crammed in. That is way too big for just your hands. Just for keeping your hands warm. I mean, look at that thing. Crazy. The fashions of this period were as extreme and absurd in their way as were those of the 1860s, but with this advantage. The natural figure was not so compressed at the waistline, and there was not the burden of material to carry about. From the vantage point of time, may they not just be as amusing. The corset, that mainstay of the modes, had straightened its front in 1902 and in 1910 had taken another long step towards sanity with its narrowed hip line, the increased size of the waistline, and the elimination of all heavy boning. And what we're moving towards here is with the corset is no longer really that corset like. It is becoming much closer to what we now would call a brassiere. It's still long, it's still kind of cinching you in all over, but it's getting closer to what we would wear today. Fashions were more sanitary and healthful. What is sanitary and helpful about clothing? I don't know. And it must be admitted that progress had been made in the right direction, even if there had been tentative modes of questionable taste and modesty from time to time. The year 1912 saw the climax of the shirtwaist girl and a great change in many women's magazines. In 1908, Harper's Bazaar, that criterion of conservative taste, carried no advertisements of underthings or corsets. But in 1912, many corsets and a few other unmentionables were included in its advertising section, which up to this time had advertised only books and various cultural advantages and appliances for the home. There was also a change in the contents of the magazines, for there appeared such articles as Diet for Reducing, Votes for Women, Dress and the Ballot, and Hints for the Helpless. Following the coronation of King George V in 1911, Queen Mary's influence was distinctly felt on the costuming of England's women. One of the ladies of the court described it as a return to the early Victorian period. She said, "You can imagine how hard it is to get used to after the liberal-minded Edward. We are all undergoing a terrible metamorphosis. It begins on the outside and works in. Why, I haven't had a good gossip since before the coronation." The new modes of Queen Mary did make the women more refinedly elegant than in the previous decade, even though society had said she could not even make a dent in the world of fashion. So I'm going to end right there because she's getting into 1913. We get into some more fashions and we're starting to see the influence of the war. So we'll end right there. But real quick, let's look at some of these dresses. We've got the hobble skirt. So there's the hobble skirt. And you can see, gosh, this version right there, that's cinched in. I would say it would be difficult to walk in these. These are tailored suits next. And you can see, they got almost like men's suit jackets, but also very narrow skirts. Forget about walking comfortably in those. And then finally, I think these are fun. This is a street suit and a peg top with embroidery and beading. So I think this one right here, I think that one's really fun. Because you can see it's the way that, it's kind of got these, this is what she was talking about, these things that are the loose fabric just kind of draping along the sides. That right there, that's just sort of loose fabric. And then based on the fact that you've got this empire waistline and this kind of sash up here, so it causes that fabric to drape. And I personally think that's really kind of cool looking. The way that it's been constructed, I guess. I made something similar to this, but not quite. And you can kind of see this right here is stitched. And so that's where those sides are getting connected right there. And so then they're just these loose. Hopefully that makes sense. And then of course the other lady, well, she just looks like she's having a good old day. All right. Well, it is 4 p.m. my time. It is a beautiful day outside, so I'm going outside. I hope the weather is good for you guys, and maybe you can get a little bit of time outside this afternoon. I think the weekend is supposed to be, I don't think there's any disastrous weather this weekend, hopefully. So hopefully everybody has a wonderful weekend. Get outside, get some fresh air. If you can't do that, get some sewing done. And I will see you on Monday. And as a reminder, I will not be here next Thursday, but we will have stream on Monday. So, have a wonderful weekend. Take care. Be good. I'll see you soon. Mwah!